This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabat Ali and you are watching Fault Lines. Napoleon Bonaparte once said, China is a sleeping giant. Let her sleep. Once she wakes up, the earth will shake. And maybe he was right. For the last 10 years, the diplomatic rivalry between United States and China has intensified to an extent that in last 10 years, we have seen the formation of two alliances against China. The first alliance, called Quad, was an alliance between the United States, Australia, Japan, and most importantly, India, a country in the immediate neighborhood of China. With this new alliance AUKUS, that is an alliance between the United States, Australia, and United Kingdom, is a rising threat for China. This alliance is going to provide nuclear submarines to Australia, a country that does not face any naval threats from her immediate neighborhood. Why this hostility continues between the United States and China? What are the problems in the southern Chinese Ocean? And what United States is exactly trying to achieve with all these hurdles being constructed against China is all a part of today's program. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
Technology-based geopolitical alliance AUKUS purportedly signals calculated objectives, but when analyzed in context of other strategic developments, the initiative has global implications. The agreement among Australia, the UK and the US to share advanced technologies and to share nuclear-powered submarines and underwater drone technology to Australia has vividly depicted exacerbation of great power competition. It will also fundamentally alter the strategic dynamics in the South China Sea because a major purpose of these submarines will be to alter naval balance of power in Asia-Pacific and to ensure the free and open Indo-Pacific region. The probability that Australia will use these submarines to patrol the South China Sea is particularly threatening to China because one of its military weaknesses is anti-submarine warfare. For China, the South China Sea is a natural shield for its national security, and patrolling of submarines there is tantamount to eroding China's defense buffer. Alongside AUKUS, there is a Quad made up of the US, India, Japan and Australia, and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken categorically declared that the Quad is far more than just a defense group. Thus, consecutive momentum garnered by AUKUS and Quad will be ciphered in Beijing not merely as a tactical move but existential threat. The politics of AUKUS and Quad underscore that US grand strategy underwent dramatic shift as Trump administration started referring to Asia-Pacific as Indo-Pacific region and renamed its Pacific Command to US Indo-Pacific Command. The weight US is placing on Indo-Pacific region is prescient prediction of immediate global trends, such as possible unraveling of NATO, escalating geopolitics of technology, and transformation of globalization from horizontal to vertical model.
My first guest in today's program is Pakistan's former ambassador, Ms. Nagmana Hashmi. She has been Pakistan's ambassador to European Union, Belgium, Luxembourg, Ireland, China, and has also been part of our diplomatic missions in France and Indonesia. Ambassador Hashmi, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador, the US foreign policy is tilting in a direction that is called anti-China by many Chinese commentators. Now, with Australia coming to the picture, how do you see the developments going?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to the program. You have to look at a little bit at the history of the geography of things, and you have to understand that the world is in a state of flux. As you said in your introduction, that over 200 years ago, Napoleon said, when the giant wakes up, the world will shake. And in our own literature, if you see, then you see that Allama Iqbal had been repeatedly saying that the East would rise, and he was mentioning, he actually meant China. So it is no rocket science that China has risen and the world is in a state of flux. But in my opinion, I think what is causing all this hyper attitude towards China is not the rise of China, because rise of China was predicted. Everybody was prepared for it. But I think it is the extent and the speed of rise of China that has actually rattled everybody. And together with that, we also see that after almost 70 years of peace and cooperation and alliance, I have served in Brussels for over 5.5 years. You could see the fissures, you could see the cracks appearing in the cross-Atlantic alliance that had held for so long. And increasingly, the Europeans are also beginning to think the Americans are using the Europeans for their wars. Because if you look at the situation in the world today, you realize that the very vehement anti-China rhetoric that comes out of the US does not come out in same measure from the Europeans. Because while US was really busy fighting the wars for the last 45 years, proxy wars here and hot wars everywhere, you realize that China had very quietly looked at itself, developed itself, and also made friends. So today, if you look at the world, you see that it's not only South Asia, Southeast Asia, but also the Middle East, Africa, and South America are all under the, I won't say the influence, but they're all friends of China. And its philosophy of taking others together is actually contrasting in a very strong
Ambassador,
way.
no, Ambassador, I'll cut you here. Ambassador,
let me just finish.
In recent past, on June 14th, 2021, all the European Union leaders in Brussels, they gave a joint statement declaring China a global threat. This is on record. This was a G7 summit where they all were together. And now with this current development, when France has been, according to French minister, stabbed in the back by Australia in this new alliance, do you see any differences coming between United States and European Union, as you have remained our ambassador there for a long time?
What I say is declarations on these summits is one thing, but as I said, I've served in Europe for 5 postings, so I have seen the differences developing. They have differences on their Iran policy, there are differences on the Palestine policy, they have differences on China, particularly on China, and they are now beginning to surface. If you see the cooperation of China with particularly with Northern Europe, with Eastern Europe, and with Southern Europe, you would realize that their economies would actually fall flat on their faces if they have that kind of animosity towards China. Yes, they are still in the Western Bloc. Yes, they still sometimes, speak with the same voice. But what I'm trying to say that there are fissures appearing, and because of that, the Americans are very, very concerned. And similarly, there's a lot of hype about the AUKUS. I personally feel that AUKUS is basically an Anglo-Saxon club. They have isolated the Europeans, and it's basically Anglo-Saxons. Now they are trying to come into a region which is yellow and brown, and there are only just white people coming there. So you have to, there are these nuances that will come into play. Besides, already, as I said, there is a very strong feeling in Europe that they have been fighting the US wars and US interests. That is why for the last so many years, they are trying to have their own consolidated European defense system. They continue to say we will cooperate and we will have the alliance with NATO, but they want to put up their own European defense organization.
Ambassador Hashmi, there are several theories that we listen for the rivalry between the United States and Europe. Some say it is because of China taking over, surpassing as an economy. Some believe it is because of the 5G technology. Some believe it is for China to be the economic hub. And there are many other theories on the table. But you being a diplomat, since you have served in the European Union as well as China, what is your personal take on that? What do you believe is the major reason of this rivalry between the West or United States and China in particular?
Frankly, I feel that Europe has, as an empire, as a colonial masters, already declined 60 years ago, and America was the rising empire. Now everybody knows that America is a decline. It is going to take time, but it is still a declining force. And economically, the European Union or the European countries are in a very difficult bind. For them, the issue of economy, the issue of migration, the issue of employment, the issue of decreasing populations is becoming a nightmare. And they are, at the moment, really not interested in having another conflict, particularly with China, because they have strategic partnerships with China. So I feel that there is a lot of hype about AUKUS also, but we have to take things in its stride. I personally do not believe that there is going to be a hot conflict in the South China Sea or in Taiwan or in the Asia Pacific in the near future, because China, I am very confident, is
Ambassador
not
Hashmi,
going to start
Ambassador
a war.
Hashmi, thank you very much for pointing this out, but there is another important development in the same picture, and that is the gulf between France and the United States is widening. Recently, the heads of the state also spoke with each other. How far do you think this diplomatic gulf between France and the United States will go on from here?
If Angela Merkel was still influential and in power, I would probably say something else. But I think it will die down, not easily, but it is not going to become a point where, like de Gaulle, they take France out of NATO or anything. I think it will eventually die down, because they have bigger issues to face at the moment. Something will be worked out. I don't think it's going to be a falling out or a breakup of the NATO alliance, or France ending its diplomatic relations with the US. Yes, there's going to be bitterness. Yes, there is going to be a lot of back channel diplomacy going on, but things will eventually settle down.
And the gap between France and Australia is also yanning. I mean, how do you see this diplomatic gulf between the two countries? The language used by the French Foreign Office was quite aggressive in nature.
Yes, very, very strong. In the larger picture of things, they will find a way to settling this down. But yes, you would also recall that we had backed out on a deal with and it was also a submarine deal with French, and we had gone and done a deal with the Turkish. It took us a long time to put our relationship back on that level of comfort and ease with France, but it eventually happened. So I think this will, it's a very serious development. It's $65 billion of deal that's gone down. So it will take a bit of time, but I don't think that I see the larger Western alliance falling to pieces on this, So there is a lot of hype, but it will calm down.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hashmi, for being in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join with the second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. My second guest in today's program is Sultan Ali Haider. He's an expert of political economy and speaks on various subjects of international relations and international economics. Sultan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Shabahar.
Sultan, we are today discussing the rivalry between the United States and China. That's not stopping, it's developing with each passing day. And we are also considering economy to be one of the major factors behind this diplomatic rivalry. What is your take on that?
Okay, thank you, Shabat, first of all, for inviting me. In terms of the rivalry, it's, first of all, it depends on how you define the interest, right? Recently, in the US international relations space, how they have started defining rivalry is also the economic size, because one of the biggest reasons why US has been the dominating force globally, and that's why it has been leading in technology, in terms of military, everything. It has been the size of its economy, and because it was dominating. The problem emanating is that China has been on the rise. It continues to be on the rise, and it has been doing phenomenal GDP growth despite its size. And it is supposed to overtake the American economy. So when that news started coming up in terms of analysts that in 20 years, 30 years, China will overtake the US economy. So that was in early 2000s. So that is when US planners started to see China as a threat in terms of their dominance. So that is at the heart of the problem.
That is at the heart of the problem. But what do you think? There are few people who believe, and I have read that in a number of articles, that the United States dollar, the USD, has got some threats from RMB, because China is now the country that is the largest exporter of the world, and it has a right to trade in its own currency. The same offers have been given to the countries that are under sanctions. That includes Iran and Syria. So what is your take on this currency to currency war between the two countries?
So in terms of currency war, I think, okay, in 1970, 71, that is where the gold peg to currency stopped, and that's why US moved to pure currency, and that where all the other central banks of the world also moved to. So now it's pure perception game, right? Now the way US controls the global economy is all trade happens in US dollars. Oil the US enforces happens in dollars. Any dollar transaction gets routed through New York. So that's where they control, that's why they're able to impose sanctions. Due to that dominance, if you see, US trade deficit has been growing and growing, right? Despite that, I mean, Pakistan, we look at trade deficits as minuscule trade deficits. Still, Pakistan's currency is under pressure. It's taking a nosedive, and then it stabilizes. Then it comes up. Then it goes down. In terms of US, it stays the same despite those hundreds of billions of trade deficits. It is because of that control. Now, China is workshop of the world. Now, if every country that is trading with China, it starts trading in Chinese currency, then it will not be routing those dollars, right? So demand for dollars will go down. Dollars will start to depreciate vis-a-vis other currencies. So that has huge implications in multiple directions. And that is again which is really threatening US's dominance.
But despite what you just said,
Yeah.
we have not seen China using or playing the economic cards so far. And nonetheless, it was in 2018 when Donald Trump started putting sanctions against some Chinese companies, and the trajectory has continued in the wake of the current government as well. So are these economic interests actually interwoven? Does China also have a downside when it comes to the economy and taking on United States economically?
No, of course, because China is better at this game, right? So right now, China is improving in terms of technology. So in terms of progress, China is doing really well, right? So China is becoming technologically advanced. Made in China is not a negative trademark as it used to be, right? So US is not winning that war in terms of technology and advancement and industrialization. So that is again what is threatening. Now, one interesting statistic is that China was supposed to overtake US economy in 2040. Now, due to COVID shrinkage in the US, COVID impact in the US, it was BBC report that in 2028 it's expected China will overtake the US economy. Now that is something which really creates that gap. China doesn't need to do anything. China, because it's growing, right? So it just needs to play its game, just needs to grow. It will become the biggest economy, and all the perks will come along with that. US is under threat because US cannot win. Okay, one of my basic thesis is that United States is not trying to win this war in terms of pure economic competition, right? It is trying to use other means to win that war. And in terms of the timeline, in my analysis, the timeline is around 2010 when Obama administration did the Asian pivot, right? So they said we will disengage from the Middle East and we want to focus on the Pacific, because that is the first time when they started to see China as a threat. Lastly, even if you look at CPEC, bringing it home to Pakistan, Pakistan was always asked that Pakistan is focused on other stuff and it should focus on trade and economy, right? Everyone was trying to associate Pakistan with trade, with terrorism and things like that. But CPEC was pure trade and economy.
Trade and infrastructure.
Infrastructure, economy,
for the
everything, right? Everything positive to it, right? So I remember Pakistan analysts were really shocked when they heard that India and US and all of those countries that used to say Pakistan is not focusing on its economies. Pakistanis are not focusing on economy and development, and they are extremists, right? So certainly when we are doing this, the whole thing is around, if these countries develop economically, they can be strong enough to pose a threat.
Sultan, people also believe that there are some political economists that believe that since China has a policy of creating economic partnerships, both domestically and abroad, they're creating economic highways, they're creating economic interdependence with other countries. United States also finds it as a threat because US has a hegemonic military posture. The only way United States influence countries is through its military hardware and kinetic force. What do you think?
I think it's not just US's military infrastructure. It is also US has a control on World Bank and IMF, right? So the countries, all the countries, it's the capitalist model. So Western world, developed economies, all the developing economies have to connect to them, trade with them. So they're dependent on World Bank and IMF. And you have read Confessions of Economic Hitmen, and countries keep on going through the cycle. Now with China coming in and doing a trade, it is providing an alternative, right? So countries can sort of bargain for a better deal and they can get out of that loop. It's that promise of getting out of that loop. That economic pressure allows US to exert pressure on countries, on the governments for their dictates, right? So for example, they want Pakistan to change its flag's color, for example, right? They say we'll impose sanctions, right? Economic sanctions, they're not using any military, right? The impact of the economic sanctions goes away when China comes into play. So that is the biggest threat.
Like it happened in the case of Iran, that has signed a deal of $450 billion with China to trade for its oil in Chinese currency, and Pakistan to provide the passage for it.
That's a perfect example. And China is so big in terms of trade, it can also do barter trade. China is workshop of the world. Iran, whatever it needs to import, most of the things, it can place an order to China and send oil and get goods in return, right? And at a deeper level, you have touched a very fine point here. It is the battle of the system, right? So it was capitalist system. So why US, everyone would want to emulate the US, right? Because it is the leader of the capitalist world, right? Now China was working on an alternative model. Now the most interesting thing is that China is becoming the flag bearer of economic growth and success, right? It has been. So many countries are now looking at what is the Chinese model. Back in the day 20 years ago, when I studied political science, nobody would really want to study what's the Chinese model. It was seen as a gone case, right? So it would be, yes, communism, socialism in general, and capitalism. And what's the American and what's the Western democracy model? Now people are studying what's the single party model, how that economy is run.
So China is also leading by example and becoming an attraction point for many other countries.
So that is becoming an implication of this. Now that implication again is very seen as a huge threat by the United States.
Thank you very much, Sultan Ali Haider, for being my guest in today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join back with the last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back to the last segment of program. The guest I have invited today is Brigadier Abdur Rahman Tarar. He's a defense analyst, author of a book which is called Che Dami. I'm going to talk about this book at length. But this is a new book that tells us a lot about China's policy, China's diplomacy, and many things that are not known to our people. So I have invited Brigadier Saab for this program as an expert of Chinese matter. Brigadier Saab, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Swat, for inviting me.
And as I was going through your book, you have addressed the issue of the southern Chinese ocean at length, where there are multiple players from all over the world. This ocean is hosting more than 1/3 trade of gasoline business as well as the liquid gas. And the problems are developing. We are now seeing AUKUS being created by United States, providing nuclear submarines to a country like Australia that does not have any rivalry in her immediate neighborhood. What are your opinion about it?
Well, Sabat, if you see emergence of this new alliance, AUKUS, I would say it's not a new phenomenon. These three countries have history of alliance, and they, since Second World War, they have been fighting together. And if you see the deployment of American forces in Australia, where, you know, in Northern Territory, Darwin, they have one of the biggest marine base. And anybody who has visited Darwin City, like maybe 10 years back, and if he goes now there, so in the evening he would see many Marines roaming in the streets. So number has almost, you know, doubled than what it was like 6-7 years back. Similarly, closer to Darwin, near Alice Spring, there are some satellite stations. Though those are known as giant stations of Australians and US, but as per some intelligence, there are only 11 individuals, out of which there's one Australian, and he also doesn't have the access to the main servers and main places. Now, if you know you talk about AUKUS and its impact on the regional security, I think with USA, Britain and Australia joining together, it's a force to reckon with, and it will definitely have serious implications for China.
But I'll cut you here, Abdur Rahman Sahab. We already, and I'm taking this from your book, you have written that there are blockades around China, including Taiwan, Korea, Japan, Philippines, Singapore, Brunei, and Australia also have great naval presence by the United States. So is United States actually beefing up the military blockade around China? Does it have a plan to actually stop the trade or do what there?
Well, when we see this pattern of US developments, we should, you know, go to the history. The time when Communist Party of China, they say that they liberated the country, from that time onward, USA has one of the major presence in the region. Why? Because their strategic thinking is that there's only one country in the world which can and which would in future challenge the US status which they enjoy presently. Now, if you see the arrangements in South China Sea, so in total I believe US has more than 80,000 active service members in Japan and Korea. They have their very strong presence in many other countries in the region, but to top it up, they have always two battle carrier groups, and which is a very big force stationed very close to the shores of China. So any country the size of China would feel insecure with such arrangements and such a big aggressive force. So definitely they would feel that they have the right to respond and make certain arrangements.
Brigadier Rahman, you have also mentioned 1929's arrangement of 9 dash lines, and that you also explained how China operates in this region. Tell us more about it.
Right. the UNCLOS, which are like very recent law about the safe passage of or safe activity of international trade, which though surprisingly US signed in 1994 and still it has to ratify, but the superpower tells others to sign and ratify. That is not very old, but the Chinese claims of South China Sea, they have historical evidence and they are very serious about it. Because what I read about Chinese history and especially their naval presence in the area, well before Columbus came to the area, one of the Chinese admiral, whose ship almost 100 years before Columbus was, I think, 30 times bigger than the Columbus ship, went up to the Persian Gulf and visited many kings and exchanged the pleasantries. So Chinese, they have claim and they have very evidences to prove that the South China Sea belongs to them. And then you see the size of the country and the size of the border. Definitely, if Americans with their presence in Korea, Japan, Philippines, Singapore, to some degree in Vietnam, and then with their huge fleet of aircraft carriers permanently stationed in South China Sea. So Chinese definitely, to protect their national sovereignty and to send a message to the people that they are secure, they would definitely extend their reach in the South China Sea so that to stop any aggression from any alliance away from their mainland China.
A bunch of islands have been created, 13 kilometers when we put them all together, and these islands have been humanly created, didn't exist before. China has started using these islands as their defense bases. Meanwhile, as you just said, it's not only United States beefing up the security, but with AUKUS, Australia is also trying to take an assertive role. And I will also add that Japan has increased her military budget to 125%. Do you think this is becoming a new hotbed of conflict between major nuclear powers of the world? And do you believe that situation can go from bad to worse in this part of the world?
I personally feel it is not that it is becoming hot now. It has never been peaceful in the past as well, since the time CPC came into power in China. And you see there was a war in Korea, then the issue of Taiwan, then multiple rounds of wars in Vietnam, in which Chinese were directly and indirectly forced to take part. And despite that fact that at that time the differential between China and the Western alliances, or to be more precisely US, was huge. Chinese were very primitive, but when it came to their defense of their national sovereignty and their objectives, they didn't thought for a while, and they went into Korea and in Vietnam, and they were very vocal about going to any length if it comes to declaration of independence of Taiwan. Now with the construction, your question about construction of artificial islands, some Western analysts do say that USA will be able to destroy these small tiny islands, and it would be an investment in which is going to be wasted. But I tell you that these places are going to play a very significant role in any future conflict, and USA, Quad or AUKUS would have to think, I think, 100 times to before taking any action, because all these islands have now either they have already or they are constructing runways, they have air defense systems and early warning. Now just imagine that China has extended its arm hundreds of kilometers in the sea, and before anybody reaches to the mainland China, I think they would be able to create a string of these artificial islands, and you can consider them as aircraft carriers in the sea. These are very cheap arrangements as compared to a modern aircraft carrier.
Modern aircraft carriers. Brigadier Rahman sir, in your book you have dedicated a chapter on the Chinese history, and from that there comes a very pertinent question. If China has this one-party system that is leading the government, that's leading the political party, and that's also governing the military, what is the internal threat? What is the reason for China to be uncomfortable with it? Apparently, the political system does not have an opposition. Normally, the democracies do it to point a score against the opponent parties, but this is only one party, and we do not normally speak about this political system. So, do you think that the CPC has any hostility, or is there any threat that they are supposed to be worried about?
This program is primarily regarding security situation in the South China Sea. If you feel like discussing about this one-party system, it needs a series of
no, but just
programs.
quickly.
But your question is pertinent as far as my book is concerned. The book is regarding geopolitical environment in the region and international, and it's focusing on China. So what is the fun in having a history chapter in this book? So primarily I did some research, and very concise I mentioned all the dynasties with only one objective, to find out that what resulted into the demise of those mighty dynasties. And I came to a surprising conclusion that almost 100% dynasties went down, or they were replaced by the people for only one reason, that when they forgot about the people, when they did not respond to the needs of the people, that was the only reason. Now if you link this to the present system, CPC has a very unique system of meritocracy, and they select and elect people to lead regions, and then they come to the national level. And they have, I personally feel they have a single point agenda, and that is that they must respond to the needs of the people. Now imagine, it's easy to talk about pulling almost closer to 1 billion people out of poverty, and seeing is believing. You go to China and you would see the type of life the Chinese are living. Forget about this Western propaganda on social media and on mainstream media. The Chinese, they have provided such a wonderful life to the people.
What threat exactly do you think CPC, as we are reaching the finishing time, what exact threat CPC has that it needs to counter for its own people?
I personally feel the domestic challenge to the CPC is managing such a huge population and giving them the hope that they will have a better future. Now here comes a point. The Chinese have already showcased, the CPC has already showcased its ability to transform the nation from a very poor nation to a prospering nation. Now there is a call, maybe people tomorrow start asking them that when will you make China great again? Because
So the people, the expectation of the people is the major challenge that CPC has. Thank you very much, Brigadier Rahman, for being my guest in today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, Confucius once said, the roads are built for journeys and not to be the destinations. The Chinese journey on the economic progress will continue. United States and allies can keep building the roadblocks, but cannot stop the march of 99 million people that have been pulled down from the line of poverty. And this economic prosperity's journey will continue, come whatever may. The only option that the West has is to be either a part of this upcoming change or to stand against it. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.